Welcome to the Track Your Life podcast. My name is Boyd Varty, and in this show, we're going story hunting. Story Hunter is an exploration of the art form and the magic of storytelling. Storytelling as a way to structure awareness and make meaning of the world. We will chase down stories to remote places, seek out unique characters, and break down the archetypal characteristics of stories that transcend time and space. We'll learn to live as story hunters. And it is my hope that by sharing in my stories, you will become the architect of your own. Story Hunter, Episode 7, A Story Apart. In any situation I find myself in, I always ask a simple and important question. What's the leverage point here? Leverage can be defined as to use something to maximum advantage. And I don't think of this as a capitalistic advantage. No, I'm more interested in leverage as optimizing the energetic gain for all. For me, a good story has always been leverage. When I was working as a safari guide, I would notice that whether the safari was going well or badly, a story could always shift the group's energetic momentum towards you, which is important when you're guiding. It was a tool that I came to rely on. A well-crafted story was not just a momentum shifter. It could, in the right light, at the right moment in the safari, infused with moonlight and wood smoke, be profoundly transcendent. When I started training young safari guides, we added a module to their training called Story Lab. They would tell a story, and then we would work on that story together, with the understanding that a good story can be made even greater with some creative workshopping. Sometimes a single word can change the impact of a sentence. Suddenly, the buffalo was very close, versus the buffalo was adjacent. It changes things subtly. We would play with the story, changing words, adding details, bringing core themes and threads, developing the characters and creating a universal personal. Sometimes the best stories happen in the moment or off the cuff, but mostly a story that has been worked on will develop layers of quality. Without fail, guides who develop stories set their experience apart. I'm telling you this because being a brilliant storyteller will set you apart in almost any setting. In entrepreneurship, you need storytelling. In leadership, you need storytelling. In fundraising, you need storytelling. As a guide, you need storytelling. At a party, you need storytelling. Morgan Housel writes, recognizing that the best story wins. Not the best answer, not the most accurate answer, not the answer people need to hear. The winner is just whoever gets the people to pay attention and nod their heads in agreement. If you're merely intelligent, you might focus all of your effort on finding precise truth. If you're smart, you'll focus just as much effort on delivering an effective message around the truth, realizing that the most powerful truth does no good if people can't pay attention to it. A doctor once told me there's a difference between an expert in medicine and an expert in healthcare. An expert in medicine knows all the right answers out of the textbook. They can diagnose with precision and are up to date on the latest trends. An expert in healthcare understands that medicine, from the patient's view, is intimidating, confusing, expensive, and time-consuming. Nothing you diagnose or prescribe matters until you've addressed the reality with patients, because even a perfect solution makes no difference to the patient who doesn't follow it. You have to be a storyteller. Taking the time to develop your capacity to tell stories will give you radical leverage through multiple fields. And if ever there was a man who leveraged his capacity for storytelling, it was the legendary South African storyteller David Rattray. Rattray had a superb voice and had grown up in the hills of Zululand in South Africa. There he had learnt the stories of the Anglo-Zulu War. Rattray could take you onto a forgotten hillside on a hot day, and there he would stand with his signature stick, and with his voice as his art, he would tell you the stories of the battle that had raged. The experience was profoundly low-tech, and sacred in its simplicity. As you sat there enthralled by David's storytelling, the empty land you stare at would come alive with the battle. David became world famous for his story of these obscure battles fought in obscure parts of Africa, simply because he told the story so well. People would come from all over the world to listen to this master standing alone on a hillside. What magnetism a story can have. David had found a single story that gripped in a way that would forever set him apart.
For various complicated reasons, an ultimatum was issued to the Zulus. The Zulus were perceived by the British colonial government in Natal to constitute a military threat to Lord Carnarvon's plan for the confederation of this country. The thrust of the ultimatum, which was issued on the 11th of December 1878, was that the Zulus would have to disband their army, and if they failed to comply with this within the prescribed period, it was the British intention to come and disband it for them. For various good reasons, the Zulus did not see fit to comply with the terms of this ultimatum, so Lord Chelmsford, in command of Her Majesty's forces in South Africa, decided that he would invade Zululand with 3 huge columns. The strongest of these 3 columns, the big central column, was to move from Pietermaritzburg to Greytown, across the Tugela River at the Tugela Ferry, and up onto the big plateau, the Biggersberg, which is a spur of the Drakensberg Mountains. And 12 miles southwest of Rorke's Drift, this column stopped and fortified a position called Helpmekaar. Lord Chelmsford and his staff decided to accompany the central column, so effectively he supersedes the column commander, Colonel Richard Thomas Glynn. Chelmsford is calling the shots. Lord Chelmsford stops the central column at Helpmekaar. When it became clear to Chelmsford that everything was proceeding according to plan, Lord Chelmsford descended down the Norstripper Pass to Rorke's Drift on the Buffalo River. It was New Year's Day, 1879, and there he waited for the ultimatum to expire, and that huge chaos of men, wagons and livestock that we described for you at Isandlwana, one must imagine at the mission station of Rorke's Drift. 4,800 men, 220 wagons, 4,500 oxen, and our friend Lieutenant Charles Harford of the 99th Regiment, who I have always used as a thread in my stories, mutters, "Rorke's Drift, what a pit," he said. It was impossible to take in a mouthful of food without imbibing at least a half a dozen flies, and one can imagine Welshmen writing home to their mothers in Monmouth that only a bloody Irishman could leave his name to a place like this, Rorke's Drift. Rorke's Drift had had quite a history even up until this point. If one looks from the mission at the Oscarberg Mountain, one can only see the rump of the hill. It is in fact a large mountain that rises up beyond the rump and drops off into the Buffalo River. The Zulus call the mountain Shiane, which means eyebrow. The mountain looks like an eyebrow. It was later renamed Oscarberg in honor of King Oscar of Sweden by the missionary Otto Witt. The mountain is terraced by a series of sandstone shelves puckered with caves. These caves are filled with Stone Age artifacts and rock art, indicating that this site was well occupied during the Middle Stone Age period. Archaeologists intimate that this site may have been continuously occupied by human beings for tens of thousands of years, and this human occupation may have something to do with a geological feature on the Buffalo River, 1,000 yards away. The Buffalo River, up until this point, is a big, slow, meandering stream. But here at Rorke's Drift it starts to cut its way into the low country, and its first move in doing so is to slide over a series of sandstone shelves which constitute the most magnificent series of natural causeways. A drift is a natural fording point on a river. There is a particularly good drift here at Rorke's Drift, a feature not repeated along the course of this river for more than 60 miles, and it was this ford that attracted those Stone Age people, and it was this ford that attracted Lord Chelmsford and his men. Rorke's Drift was named Rorke's Drift after an Irish trader come farmer called James Rorke, Esquire. Rorke was an energetic, intrepid, entrepreneurial Irishman. Rorke had come to this country in 1849. He came to South Africa because of a lack of potatoes in Ireland. Rorke had a huge farm, which consisted of the Shiane Mountain and the Great Plain that extends north and west from the base of the mountain. Rourke built his little establishment up on a shelf of sandstone at the foot of the Shiane mountain. The shelf used to drop off about 4 foot sheer. The missionaries have broken and filled the steep bank over the intervening years. He built a house where the museum stands today, and 40 yards off to the north he built a storeroom where the little church stands today. The church is, in itself, an historic building. It was completed in 1882 and almost dates from this period. The church was built using some of the stone from Rourke's original storeroom and sits on the same spot as that original building. It is roughly the same size as Rourke's storeroom, and all one must do is imagine the church standing today, having a thatched roof and a veranda down its long side. In this storeroom, Rourke housed the commodities that he used to trade with his friends, the Zulus, and they loved him, and they called him Jimu, and they called his establishment Kwajimu, or Jim's Place. The old Zulu folk still call Rourke's Drift Kwajimu to this day. Rourke used to keep his milk cows in the well-built stone cattle kraal, which is still in its original position at the northern end of the ledge. James Rourke's great friend was the chieftain Schayo Gaqongongobese, was the wealthy and powerful chieftain who lived in the Bache River Valley opposite Rourke's Drift. Rourke and Schayo spent much time together. There are stories of these men walking the plains north of Rourke's Drift, clad in their jackets and cloth caps and shooting wildfowl together. These were balmy, happy days, and it is a great shame that it had to change. Schayo was the chieftain who in due course was to give Bartle Frere one of the pretexts for the issuing of the British ultimatum. Rourke was married to the most beautiful woman, Sarah. The local hunters of the period tell us that such a beauty was she, that after a protracted hunting trip to Mozambique and back, it was absolutely obligatory to pop in at Rourke's Drift just to gaze into the eyes of Sarah. This had the effect, they said, of raising one's flagging spirit. There is a photograph of Sarah in the museum at Rourke's Drift. I have stared at that photograph long and hard, and beauty I cannot find, and I've come to the inescapable conclusion that Sarah's reputation as a great beauty must have something to do with the scarcity value she must have enjoyed in these parts at this time. Rourke used to spend a fair amount of time sitting on his veranda, looking at his view, which was not a bad one, and apparently he sat there taking in vast quantities of square-face gin, to which eventually he becomes addicted. In 1875, James Rourke sent his women servants off to Ladysmith to replenish the supply of square-face, and they failed to return with this precious commodity, and in a fit of alcoholic rage, James Rourke shot himself. He now lies buried about 300 yards from the mission building at the foot of the Oscarberg mountain. He is buried under a yard of concrete. He did not want anyone to interfere with his remains. Exit, James Rourke. On Rourke's death, this property passes into the hands of the Swedish Missionary Society, and they sent out a rather controversial character to start up a mission station which, because of its juxtaposition with that excellent ford, was to service both banks of the Buffalo. His name was Witt, Otto Witt. It is not clear if Witt demolished Rourke's old house before rebuilding, or if he simply added on to the existing dwelling. But he built a substantial dwelling on the same spot, and it was this house of Witt's which was, as it happened, destroyed by fire during the course of the Battle of Rourke's Drift. But Witt returned in 1879 and rebuilt his house pretty much on the same foundations and according to the same design, and the building which is today the museum is the house that Witt built, and it's in its 1879-1880 condition. It has been beautifully restored and is today the most delightful little museum, and well worth a visit. The differences between the building that you see today and the building as it was on the day of the battle are these. The building today has a corrugated iron roof, whereas the original building had a thatched roof, and this building, down two sides, consisted of a series of little cubbyhole rooms which communicated largely with the exterior. This is a peculiar piece of South African colonial architecture. It was because the loo was detached or semi-detached, and this was to have great moment in the battle. The existing veranda is probably original. It led on to two big ante-rooms, one of which communicated with a little cubbyhole room. And Witt lived in this house with his wife and 3 infant children. He did not have the gorgeous daughter that the movie Zulu gave him. Otto Witt was not particularly pleased to see Lord Chelmsford and his men, and Chelmsford, having descended from the healthy heights of Helpmachar down to these lower altitudes, notes immediately that his men started to succumb to those maladies that took more lives of British soldiers in this country than ever did the spears of the Zulus or the bullets of the Boers, dysentery and enteric fever. If ever you want the harsh reality of what fever did to British soldiery in this country driven home to you, you should wander through the cemetery at Intombe in Ladysmith, the cemetery that serviced the British garrison during the siege. Go and wander through those hundreds of crosses marking the graves of men who died of fever.
In some ways, so much of life is micro-stories. Imagine how many times in your life you will be asked the proverbial question, "Sir, what do you do?" Many people who I coach who are in transitions out of traditional careers into life and work that feels more aligned hate this question during the transition phase. They suddenly feel themselves in narrative no man's land, without a defined what I do box to tick. In fact, I know quite a few people who hate this question for multiple reasons. So often we find ourselves fumbling with our own shame or fear of grandiosity as we answer in staccato, vague terms. And it's not just those who are developing a path. I've heard multi-millionaires underplay themselves, saying things like, "I work in a bank," when they own a bank. Imagine if instead of hating the question, "What do you do?" we worked on our response, understanding that we'll be asked it all through our lives, and each time we answer could be a moment to set ourselves apart with an answer that profiled our work while creating intrigue and connection to the person asking us. That's a very short story worth working on. That's leverage. I don't think of leverage as getting ahead. I think of it as an opportunity to deepen connection. So, Boyd, what do you do? I'm a writer and a coach. I do some tracking in Africa, blah, blah. It's too many things. And this answer will need more explanation. Versus, I create transformational encounters for people in nature, and I'm on a mission to reconnect as many people as possible to the truest, most essential parts of themselves. I do this through multiple avenues of storytelling, coaching, and retreat spaces. Thank you for asking. What makes you feel most alive? In some ways, this is a silly example, but imagine the impact of working on the narrative of your mission, your work, how you think about what's important to you. When you work on a story, you are forced into a reflection. In some ways, you deepen what that experience means and has meant to you. You find layers inside of it, layers of understanding. There is this idea in writing that you should work in the book, and then at other times you should work on the book. Working in the book, you are actually writing. Working on the book, you step back to examine it. Arcs, character development, how themes emerge and tie together. Your work on the book gives you more context, so that when you go back to writing and working in the book, you're in a different headspace. In some ways, any kind of life coaching relationship is stepping back to work on your life so you can live in your life with more awareness. And this is what I'm proposing here as a story hunter. So much of the best of my life has come out of stepping back to work on the multiple stories that make up my life and developing these stories. I believe that this is work that you should take time to do, and I believe that it will radically leverage your life and impact in almost any setting. If you are cultivating your capacity as a storyteller, you cultivate your life. If you are becoming a storyteller, you are working on your life as much as you are working in it. Humans are narrative creatures. This has been true since the first people told stories around the fire. Become a master of narrative, and you are a world maker. You set yourself a story apart from everyone else. This story that follows is by a friend of mine, Andrea Sitole. Andrea has had an interesting life, to say the least. He's a superb tracker, safari guide, and storyteller. He lives in the village of Justicia, west of the Londolozi Game Reserve. How he found his way to becoming a safari guide is a story worth hearing. I will leave you with Andrea's story that we worked on together in a story lab. This is Andrea in his second language telling his story, Into the Unknown.
Hi, My name is Andrea Sitole, and I'm a guide here at Londlozi. I grew up around my grandfather, who he always tells stories. And in my culture, we'll have a boma, which is just for a man, and a boma, which is just for a woman. And that's how we will learn how to live as a man and how to live as a woman. Unfortunately, we are losing that campfire telling stories. And I was very fortunate enough to come and work here at Londlozi, which we still practice the campfire telling stories. And my grandfather, he always said that we all have stories. It's just a question of, do you share the story? So I just want to share my life story with you all, because I feel like by sharing a story, we can all learn something. My life is good, but my life hasn't been always that way. I was born and raised in Mozambique, in a beautiful town called Magudu. In 1978, a war has broke out in my country. We heard for weeks and months of the fight raging between government-backed Frelimo and a rebel-based Renamo. Reports will come in of intense brutalities committed against simple, kind-hearted village families who were living off the land in those areas. Stories of brutal rape, stories of death, stories of young children being taken away from their families and forced to fight and kill. Those were stories that filtered on my early childhood. And every day, the war came closer to us. And every day, the stories grew more common. And soon, we could hear gunfire from the distance at night. My family, over 30 of us, and me at the age of 3.5 years old, had to make a huge decision. Did we stay and take our chances with the violence? Or did we set off into the unknown in the hopes of finding a new life and a safe place? Behind us lay the war. Ahead of us, over 150 kilometers through wild, uncharted territories, full of wild animals, lay the hopes of making it into South Africa. In order to cross that wilderness, we knew we needed help. So we found our transporter. Transporters were professionals at getting you across the border into South Africa. They were hard men. They were men who understood how to operate in the bush. And they had a not so simple task to take you over 150 kilometers across dangerous wild terrain on an east-west trajectory through the breadth of Kruger National Park and deposit you in South Africa. So one early morning, with the sound of gunfire in a horizon around Magudu, we made a decision to go into the unknown and trust ourselves that we'll find our way and to track a new life. Our transporter's name was Mkwambana. I still know Mkwambana. And to this day, if you look on his eyes, you can see he's a man who's seen wilder parts of life. Mkwambana led over 30 of us into the wilderness. I remember that first moonlit night into the sound-filled darkness of Kruger National Park. We walked at night because we weren't welcome in South Africa. Bear in mind, in 1985, it was the apartheid South Africa. So it wasn't an exact warm welcome for a black family from Mozambique. So we're like in between a rock and a hard place. What will you do? We walked in a group, and one of the greatest problems that we faced was how we're going to find water along the way. We needed hydration because even though we walked in winter, It was hot. Mkombana knew some of the water holes, but often they were dry when we arrived there. And when we did eventually find a small water hole, it wasn't a crystal flowing water pool. It was a brackish pan with elephant dung floating on it. To us, though, it was like a pristine pool with Fiji bottled water. So if you are that thirsty, you realized that there is a wild animals inside all of us that was programmed to survive. At night, we will sleep in a groups that spread out. The idea being that we'll be able to keep a broad 360 degrees awareness. At that time, there were many refugees that were crossing the reserve, and lions had learned that people were easy feeding. There were many stories of men eating lions in Kruger that had particularly learned to feed on refugees that were crossing the reserve. In fact, one scientist noticed that the territory of lions in Kruger started to reflect the corridors where refugees regularly crossed. So we knew this. So can you imagine how we walked that gauntlet through the moonlit darkness, how our heart pounded? One of the other reasons why we would sleep spread out is that when lion did attack us while we were sleeping, they will probably get one portion, and the rest will be awake and quietly walk away. There were many stories of old men and old women that were making that journey, that could not keep up with the group, and they fell at the back of the group, and they fell further back, and they become prey to the predators. My earliest memories as a 3.5 years old was lying next to my mother, hearing lions roaring, elephant breaking branches, and hippos calling in the darkness. And even at that age, I remember the rapid drum of her heart as I held myself close to a warm body. And I realized that there's something really big that was happening within our lives. It took us 2 days, 2 days of the most nerve-wracking fear, the most grueling walking. And eventually we crossed Mala Mala airstrip, walked through Londolozi Reserve, and late on the second day, we made our way into the western boundary of Sabi Sand, and we jumped the fence and arrived in the village of Justicia. It's not like our problem were over arriving in the village of Justicia. There were other Mozambican families back there, but we had to settle and immediately had to integrate our life into a foreign land. But there was some solace in a sense that we're now safe from the violence of the war. My late father, Domingo Sitole, was able to get a job here at Londolozi, working as a habitat manager. He tried to spend some time with me, but after my earlier crossing from Kruger National Park, my only interest was when he bring an impala ration back home for us to eat. Because remember, I'm second of 18 children. So to get enough meat was never easy. And when my dad will bring an impala ration back home for us to eat, we will feed like a pack of hungry wild dogs. So my first interest on wildlife was solely with eating it. Years passed, and I would come help my father from time to time. And soon, I was employed here at Londolozi as a tractor driver. I remember the day it all changed for me. The day I once found myself pulled off to follow the track. I've been working on fixing roads somewhere because part of my job was to keep the reserve upgraded. Driving my tractor back home, I saw a leopard crossing the road, dragging an impala. I drove my tractor quickly to the area where she had crossed. and I felt this intense curiosity rise on me. Where had that leopard gone? I got out and I began to try and look. I can see where she had crossed the road dragging an impala. But as soon as her tracks left that soft and bare soil, I couldn't see where she had moved, even though she was dragging a 60 kg impala underneath her. Yet I knew there are men who will be able to see where her tracks led. I knew there are great trekkers in this area. Men like our transporter Mkombana, who has taken us across the border into South Africa. I wanted to be someone who could follow a faint track of a wild animals and find it into the wilderness. But I had no sense of how I will do it. And then thought, when we came to South Africa, we had no understanding of what will happen. And that's what gave me the strength to set off into my second journey to the unknown, which was the journey of becoming a trekker. I first asked a local guy here in the village of Londlozi, and he told me that to become a trekker, you need to look after your father's cattle. But believe me, my father didn't even have a goat. So how am I going to become a trekker? And then heard of two Londolozi legends, Alex van den Heever and Renia Simhlongo, who had started a trekker academy that took young men like myself in and for a year and put them into a grueling trekker training program that will give them the skills they needed. Half of that year meant leaving my family and going away in the middle of the country in a place called Samara. We trained 6 hours a day and were taught everything from tracks identification of small mammals, insects, frogs, birds, as well as the art of learning how to follow a wild animals, how to tap into the language of wilderness. 10 hours a day, in and for a year, all we did was immerse ourselves into the art of trekking. At that time, I was married. My wife and I were close. Leaving my family was hard, but I knew I had to go forward into unknown circumstances and trust my own curiosity and trust that I will find my way. During that year, I fell in love with trekking, and the dream that developed was of becoming a Londolozi trekker. But my place here was never guaranteed. At the time, all I could do is to look for the next tracks in front of me. You see, trekking is in itself a gift of being able to find your way into the unknown. It makes you present. And it asks you to open your awareness and open yourself to the way that the story wants to unfold. As I trek, I always think not just of an animal that I am following, but when we are willing to go after an animal with no sense of where it is, with no knowledge of where it might be, we are again committing ourselves to go into the unknown. And in the sheer act of being present into going to that unknown, it is incredible what encounter we're going to have along the way and what amazing things we can find. Since then, I have become addicted to this process. Maybe it's because it's in my blood from when I was young. But trekking became like a drug to me. It is my passion. It led me to realize my dream of becoming a trekker and then a ranger here at Londlozi. And it has taken me into other adventures. One of these adventures was when I was asked to go to Brazil to to be part of a cutting-edge conservation project for 3 months. I've been working in a cattle range farm that has been converted into a jaguar reserve. There were jaguars there, but you couldn't see them like you see leopard and lions here at Londlozi. And the owners of the reserve in Pantanal wanted to rebuild the trust like we have here at Londlozi. And we told them that to do that you need to habituate the jaguars, track them, find them, and show them that you mean no harm. Bear in mind, I've never been on an aeroplane before, and the only time I crossed the country's border was as a refugee. So to fly to Brazil, to be part of a cutting-edge conservation project, was a real sign how our lives can change when we connect with our passion. Each morning I will go out and I will find the tracks of a jaguar and I will follow in a wilderness that is completely foreign to me. It was an incredible experience, and I can tell you now that 3 months that I've worked on that jaguar habituation project, they're now viewing jaguar on a regular basis. And people from all over the world has been inspired by seeing that animal to become custodian to the natural world. And sitting here tonight, I'm proud to know that I have some small part on it. Again and again, I can see the power that flows within us, but we have to be willing to go into the unknown and be present to where the tracks wants to take us. If I can go from a war-torn refugee into a global ambassador for conservation and wilderness, then there are options for each and every one of us here. But we have to be willing to go into the unknown. And I promise it will lead you somewhere magical.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Track Your Life podcast with Boyd. To begin your own story hunting journey, sign up to the online course on Boyd's website, or just find him on Instagram, X, or your favorite podcast player. Please rate and review this podcast so that more people can find and enjoy it.